Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the board meeting for the California High-Speed Rail Authority, January 18th, 2024. We'll first call the meeting to order and ask the secretary to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Schenk.
Here.
Chair Richards.
Here.
Director Camacho.
Here.
Vice Chair Miller.
Here.
Assemblymember Arembula. Director Perea. Director Gilmetti.
Here.
Director Escutia. Director Williams. Senator Gonzalez. Director Cohen.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And if I could ask our Vice Chair Miller to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of course. Please stand.
Thank you. And as we do at each meeting, we will start with public comment. First, if the secretary will advise the people in the audience and those calling in how they can address us. And Mr. Secretary, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Before we begin public comment for the California High-Speed Rail Board of Directors meeting, I would like to go over some important information for members of the public who have joined us in person and wish to provide comment. You will be called upon in the order that we have received your card. If you are joining the meeting via Zoom and wish to provide public comment, please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. Or if you are dialing in by phone, pressing the number 2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called upon in the order that their hands are raised. Once you are in the queue and your name is called, please click the prompt at the bottom of your screen to allow your microphone to be unmuted. If you are joining by phone, we will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. At that point, you will hear a message that your phone is being unmuted. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes to speak. I will remind you when you have 15 seconds remaining. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly and clearly say your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization that you are representing. Mr. Chairman, we do not have any in-person speakers at this time. And we do not have any online speakers at this time.
I guess we've lost our mojo. What has happened? There must be somebody responsible for that. Well, with that then, ladies and gentlemen, we will move into today's agenda. Agenda item number 1 is to consider the approval of the December 6th, 23 minutes.
So moved.
Motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Director Schenk. Chair Richards.
Yes.
Director Camacho.
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller.
Abstain.
Director Perea. Director Gilmetti. Director Escutia. Director Williams. Director Cohen.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, item number 2 this morning is the consideration of approving the updated total expenditure authorization request of our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Annis. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. So we're coming to you today with I'm sorry, did I jump the gun? Okay. We're coming to you today with.
I just showed up. I didn't jump in, that's all.
We're coming to you today with this expenditure authorization request, really because of the recent award of significant federal grants. We received 4 federal grants in 2023, totaling about $3.3 billion. the match requirement for those federal grants is about 900 million. So we have about 4.1 billion of new activity we're ready to proceed with because of these federal grants. And in fact, Christine Inouye comes after me with part of that to advance final design. So we're coming to you now so we can advance work as quickly as possible on some of the newly funded scope. Next slide, please. Just as a background for the board, the board policy 11-001 directs board approval of the annual fiscal year budget and multi-year program baseline budgets, or sometimes we call them also expenditure authorizations. The board last approved an expenditure authorization in March of 2023, and the amount approved was $20 billion. Staff with this item is recommending the board approve a new authorization level of $26 billion, an increase of about $6 billion. Again, mostly generated because of the federal grant awards, and also to update for some of the 2023 project update report numbers as well. And I'll go through those in more detail. Again, come to you today instead of later because we are able to get some of this work going very quickly, because some of the work would be based on current contracts where we can issue a notice to proceed, or in the case of advancing design, or in the case of right-of-way, get to work very quickly as well with appraisals and some of those early right-of-way efforts. Next slide, please. Just a little further detail on the board action in March of 23. Again, that action increased the expenditure authorization to 20 billion. Really, it was supported by an action the legislature had taken in the prior year to appropriate the remaining 4.2 billion of Prop 1A bond funds. In March, we did not comprehensively adjust the program baseline budget for all cost in the 2023 project update report. We focused on completing the civil construction work, CP 1 through 4, and limited the adjustment at that time to the CP 1 through 4 civil work. Next slide, please.
Brian, does that mean that we expended all of Prop 1A money?
We have not yet expended all Prop 1A money. We think it'll be that 4.2 billion would be fully spent probably sometime in the 24-25 fiscal year.
Okay.
So this slide is just a status or a summary of where we are today before this requested action. Again, 20 billion is the expenditure authorization. I want to note that most of that is that Central Valley civil construction, the track and systems work. Also, though, it does include the bookend funding, about 1.3 billion. That's the Caltrain electrification, LA Union Station, et cetera. Also includes some early efforts that the board authorized on configuration level design on Merced to Bakersfield extensions, and also the station design in that area as well, up to a configuration level. Next slide. So lots happened since March of 23. So the January 2024 expenditure authorization we're requesting today would incorporate those major updates. Again, the 3.3 billion of federal grant awards, and we'll go through those on the next slide. We note, though, at a high level that the federal grants, are not only advancing design and construction on Merced to Bakersfield, but very significantly are also provided funds for the 6 high-speed rail train sets. that, of course, the board had issued, approved the issuance of the request for qualifications late last year. Those procurements have advanced. Again, the RFQ, the Rail Systems Engineering Services contract the board approved last year has been executed. And of course, the board's also approved the release of the track and systems design contract. And there'll be many more procurements coming to the board this spring around train sets and track and systems as well. Next slide. So our 4 federal grant awards in 2023 are as follows. The big one, of course, Fed-State Partnership awarded in December. That's $3.374 billion. Includes 6 train set facilities, construction of the Fresno station, a final design and right-of-way acquisition for the Merced and Bakersfield extensions, and funding to extend construction into Bakersfield. That's about a 13-mile extension that the federal government chose to focus on there. Gets us near the Bakersfield Airport from Poplar down to 13 miles down near, again, I think it's just to the west of Highway 99 near the airport. I'll just note here, we've received some questions recently on this. So we did apply for the second track on the 119-mile segment. The federal government did not fund that with this particular Fed-State Partnership grant. They chose instead to focus on an additional 13 miles of construction toward Bakersfield. So, we continue to look for funding for that second track. I know the legislature, the board wants to see that built as a 2-track system initially, and it makes a lot of sense to do so. So we'll continue to explore future federal grants for that, or if we don't receive those, then we'd explore the option of state funding to support the second track construction.
So as we put out our track and systems RFP, are we going to be putting out for 2 tracks or 1 track?
Well, because that's a multi-stage procurement, the first step will be bringing on the contractor to design. So they'll design it as a 2-track system. And then the first action in construction would be for CP4, I think in about a year. So at that point, we would need to identify the funding, and we would, with that contractor, negotiate a price for starting with the CP4 construction. And again, the hope is by that time we'll have identified the state funds or the federal grant awards to go ahead and build it as a 2-track system.
Okay. That's going to be a problem.
Well, it's the reality of not having all our funding in place. And so our intention is to build a 2-track electrified system for all 171 miles. And the interesting thing about what the federal government did on this grant, it's a very good grant for us, but they extended as Brian indicated, they gave us money to extend further into Bakersfield for 2 tracks.
Right.
Into Bakersfield. So we're going to build 2 tracks along the entire thing. We have to work through the chronology of how it's done based on available funding. And so that's the way we're going to do it. But ultimately, when we're in service, we want to build a 2-track electrified system for
What's
171 miles.
the dollar amount for that second track?
It's about 1.4 roughly for
Mhm.
that second track.
Okay.
We're still short money to finish this whole segment. We don't have all the money. We're probably about $7 billion short that we still have to find to finish this segment from Bakersfield to Merced as a 2-track system. So the board's got to go after and get the rest of these funds so we can finish this thing.
Yeah,
But
I
we're
think it's
designing- But initially, we're going to be designing to
yes,
construct
2
the
tracks.
2.
Yeah,
Okay.
it makes all the sense in the world to build the initial operating segment as 2 tracks.
Yeah.
And so that's what we've indicated we're going to do. Look, the entirety of this project from day one is about been scrambling to find money to do what we need to do. And candidly, we've been wildly successful. And so we're going to continue to be. And so as Jim indicated, last year we put out the project update report. We updated the cost estimate to get the 171 mile segment done. We indicated there's an $8 to $10 billion gap. We identified a 5-year federal funding strategy to get about 8 billion in federal funds. And in the first 2 years of that 5-year strategy, we're at 3.4 billion. And so, we're going to continue to keep going back. And we're very clear, and you'll hear us say as we get to the business plan and things that are coming up next on the horizon, that we still need to stabilize state funding for this project because our only source of ongoing money expires in 2030. And that's got to get stabilized so we can do all the things we need to do. And those are the conversations that we have in front of us. But I don't want to, at the same time, I certainly don't want to undervalue what the federal government just did, because you're going to see a chart shortly, I think, here about how it changed our future just with this one grant in terms of what we can fund. It's amazing. And we got to just keep going at it and keep fighting the fight and keep working to get it done.
What's that? Oh, yeah, no question.
I think you can make it even stronger than that. The federal government, our management team in looking at the IIJA determined what we thought we could compete for in 2023, and the federal government funded exactly what we thought we could compete for. So there was no more that we could have asked for in the federal state partnership. But the key is now what happens in 24, 25, and the balance of the IIJA.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, if I could just comment, having seen the various expenditure authorizations over the years, this is a good news one. This is one I'm real happy to see, and think that it portends good things for the future. It puts us in the right momentum. So, we're so used to sort of negative reports, and this one is very positive. So I'm very pleased to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schenk.
Yeah, and 3 other grant awards to mention here on the slide. The Chrissy Award, 202 million for 6 grade separations in City of Shafter. The Raise Grant for 20 million, Fresno Historic Depot renovation. And lastly, a grant that is small in award amount, but is significant ongoing because we've been accepted into the FRA's Corridor Identification and Development Program. So that comes with an automatic award of 500,000, which isn't a lot of money. However, being in the program is putting us in the priority for future work. We've been accepted in really one of the national priority corridors. So that will be helpful for future planning grants. It'll be helpful for future construction grants because we've been prioritized.
And Brian, just to be clear for the board and the public, that prioritization in that corridor ID program, tell people what the scope of that corridor is.
Sure. So this is the phase 1 corridor from San Francisco to Los Angeles, Anaheim. So that full corridor has been brought in. So again, we think when we apply for future, advancing design work, planning efforts, all of that will be in a higher ranking because we're part of this priority corridor program. All right, next slide, please. So in addition to the new federal grant awards, as mentioned, the last expenditure authorization provided updates for the PER related to the civil construction. What we're asking now is that we do the other components of the 23 PER track and systems again, for the single track is what we've included in the baseline to date, because that's what the federal ARA grant requires. So there was an adjustment for the second track. And it's came up earlier in the discussion about 1.4, I'm sorry, this number, 1.4 billion is in the PER for the single track. The other construction work in the Central Valley, 127 million. It includes things like ongoing property management, freight rail coordination, State Route 46 work we're doing in coordination with Caltrans. And lastly, program management and support. Other This includes ongoing support contracts for the Central Valley and program-wide. So this is our project delivery partner, all the other contracts that assist us in our efforts, not just for the Central Valley construction, but also for managing our remaining two environmental clearances, the other statewide work that includes things like the business plan and other statewide efforts. Next slide, please.
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
Brian, on the second track, I know you're not asking for that funding or that authorization at this
Mhm.
time, but it's just an authorization. We don't necessarily have to have funding for that to budget for it, right?
Well, historically, the baseline budget or the expenditure authorization, as I see it, it's been part of our funded program. So we have from Merced to Bakersfield at the P65 level, a $35 billion budget, if you will. But what we're proposing is to bring into the expenditure authorization those components as they have their funding identified specifically.
I understand that. I just don't want anyone to get the impression that we're not thinking two tracks,
Right,
right?
correct.
Okay.
So again, this is just a summary in numbers of what we talked about, primarily the federal grant awards that are resulting in the changes here. Again, going from 20 billion in the current authorization to 26 billion with the new authorization. Next slide. So the next slide gets to the funding we have to support this. And this is our stack chart of different funding sources. So about in the middle of the chart in purple is our new grant funds, about $3.3 billion. And then as we get in the top 3 or 4 blocks, we get to cap and trade. We feel fairly certain, given the last 2 years of cap and trade, that our funded program is solidly around $28.7 billion now with the new federal grant. And that's assuming cap and trade stays the level it has been the last 2 years of about $1 billion a year coming to the authority. We do note the last 2 cap and trade auctions have been very robust. And if we continue at the level of the last 2 auctions, the authority would be bringing in closer to $1.25 billion a year. So we do in this chart show that level as well. These are the kind of the boxes on the top left of the form here. Again, kind of as a baseline number, you might consider 28.7 billion. If cap and trade was lower by 250 million a year, that would drop to 27 billion funded program. Again, if it's higher, it's 30.5 billion. Relative to our 8 billion federal target, we've again brought in 3.3, that would leave 4.7 billion. So again, success on achieving the 8 billion target would bring us to about 35 billion, again, with the high cap and trade assumption. So really in all scenarios here, we've presented with ranges of cap and trade, we have sufficient funding for this baseline program we're asking the board to adopt. Again, 26 billion in expenditures, and we think, most likely about 28.7 billion in revenues. So about extra 2.7 billion of revenues. I'll note, we're reserving a lot of those future revenues to match future grants. So, that amount, maybe something around 2 billion would match 2 billion of state funds would match the 4.7 billion of future federal awards. But still, again, a good picture of funding for the scope we're bringing to you today. And, back to the second track discussion, certainly if cap and trade stays at the robust level we've seen in the last 2 auctions, I think there's some pathway there to see using some state funds to fund that second track cost as well. But would like to go another year or so, see how we do with federal funds, come back to the board when construction's ready to start on track and systems.
Hey, Brian, board members, I want to make one comment because you're gonna hear me reference some of this later in this hearing when I talk a little bit about the upcoming business plan. I do think one thing that chart reflects is something that especially with the reinvigoration, if you will, of our federal partnership, we really have to solidify the state side of the equation. It's good to have cap and trade dollars, and it's good to see cap and trade see it be as vibrant as it has been the last 2 years, and it looks like that's going to continue, and we're happy with that. But there are things about the instability of that makes it hard to manage a major infrastructure project. For example, some years it could be down, some years it could be up. We've had rough years and good years, and that just makes it really hard to predict and stay on task with certain work that we do. And so we've talked in prior business plans. We will certainly talk in the next business plan, but it's especially true now with the federal government re-engaged in this project to really stabilize as soon as we can that cap and trade number, that cap and trade figure. And that means either working closely with the legislature and policymakers to extend the cap and trade program beyond 2030, or to find other ways where we can finance out of those future revenues. Because if we can pull some money forward, we can make some decisions earlier to do some things. We can also take advantage of innovative federal financing options that you must have a repayment source for, and a long-term funding option like extended cap and trade or some other version of stable state funding is going to be necessary to do that. So I don't, want to solve all those problems today, but I just want to say it's really good to see what cap and trade is doing. However, for a mega project that is a multi-year mega project like this one, we really do got to stabilize that state side of the equation. It's a task in front of us we got to get to.
How much further out would we have to extend cap and trade in order to sell bonds?
Well, again, in my humble opinion, it's you want something for decades, not a couple of years to sell bonds against. When I think about Caltrans or other, they have a constant funding source in gas tax revenues that never go away, and they have an ability to use financing options to finance against those revenue streams for purposes of bringing dollars forward and completing work sooner. And so you really need a permanent source or something that's going to be at least through a 2050 timeline, in my view, to be able to finance against that kind of revenue stream. The nice thing about cap and trade is we are one entity that receives funding to build green, clean projects, but there are many. We would get 25% of a quarterly auction or annual auction revenue. So there's a lot of others who are interested in cap and trade being extended. And it's just really important that it's done relatively soon, that it's done in a very comprehensive way. And importantly for us, I think it's done in a way where we can finance off that revenue stream. It's really important for us to be able to bring dollars forward and really take advantage of innovative federal programs that are low cost, RIF loans, TIFIA loans, RIF loans, these kinds of things that you can do to advance certain elements of the program at really low cost and very favorable repayment rates. So that's just something that's before us that has to get done.
Mr. Chairman.
Ed?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, Brian. That was exactly where I was going. First of all, just a preliminary question. Brian, who does the prognostication about cap and trade? Is that someone in finance, or is that, where do we
Well,
get our information from?
Yeah, I think there's not really an official prognosticator in this case. As an auction mechanism, the entity that runs it, the air board,
Yeah.
avoids predicting future. I think they feel that's more appropriate for an auction. Department of Finance tends to be very conservative in their future projections and really wants to see more of the money in. So they tend to build in a fairly low number into each budget for the assumption of future cap and trade. So we're really basing these numbers on, actual observed revenue coming into the system. So again, the last 2 years, annualized for high-speed rail is $998 million, right? So that's at the billion level. And the last two auctions, I think, annualized would be about 1,238,000,000. So again, we think our approach here, we're kind of in a sense creating a bit of our own observation of what the market's doing and using that as the forecast,
Mhm.
because we don't have an official administration forecast per se.
Yeah. Well, all the more reason to underscore what Brian's talking about, the instability. And so I have a bit of heresy here as a former Secretary of Transportation for California. Maybe one way to start looking, and I know the highway lobby and everybody will go nuts just listening to me say this, but as a stable source, we might start looking at the gas tax. I mean, we're going to be taking hopefully lots of cars off the road. And there might be a way, that's not something that I've fleshed out here today, but every ultimate policy change starts with the kernel of an idea. So I'm just going to throw that out, and obviously I'll talk to the staff more about this later.
Thanks, Director Shank.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah,
Yes.
I think the board's position ought to be trying to get the legislature to extend cap and trade for at least 30 years. So that we could move forward and use bond financing to move these projects forward. And so I would like to see some, maybe a group from the board start meeting with the Transportation Committee in the Senate and the Assembly and try to educate them towards making that happen.
I think that's a good idea. Thank you, Director Gilmetti. Anybody else? Thank you. Go ahead, Brian.
Sure. I think just a couple more slides. Next slide, please. So this is just a detailed slide that gives you individual funding sources split into project development and construction with subtotals. And then we show at the bottom our book-in projects and funding source. So as you'll know, kind of the second to the right column where we show the change. Sure. Most of the dollars in that column are the federal grant levels. And then cap and trade is also up as an expenditure. And that's because when the board acted in March, we built in the full 4.2 billion of Prop 1A. So that's already incorporated into our assumptions of expenditure. So here, all the state match is coming from cap and trade. So that's why that state fund source is up here. So again, 6 billion is the addition requested here. And next slide. And this is a concluding slide. So again, in accordance with the existing board policies, we've brought this action item to the board to request an increase to the expenditure authorization by 6,084,000,000 to a new total of 26,094,000,000 to budget additional funds for the newly awarded federal grants and other adjustments from the 2023 project update report.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
have
Director.
you or a delegation of our board met with the new speaker yet?
Say that again, please. I'm
Have you
sorry.
met with the new speaker yet?
I have set up an appointment. It's not, I've asked to have an appointment set up, but I've not met with him yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
It might also be wise, first and foremost, the speaker, but to go talk to the full caucus at some point. And we probably should do that regularly, semi-regularly. Just to get in front of them, to make sure that they have understanding and buy-in with the project and the challenges and are forward thinking with it for us.
Thank you, Director Cohen. Anybody else? Okay. All right, this is, go ahead. Did you have something?
I was going to move the item.
Yeah, thank you. This is an action item. Do we have a motion for approval? Okay, a motion and a second. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Director Schenk, Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Perea, Director Gilmetti,
Yes.
Director Escutia, Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Cohen.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. And you just noted that Director Williams has joined the meeting and was here for the discussion on the previous item. Next
Mr.
on our agenda today, we have to consider the approval of the issuance of the second notice of, to proceed for the Merced Madera project section. I'm going to ask our CEO to introduce this before Mr. Noe comes up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, this is a follow-on to the adoption by the board some time ago to move forward with advancing the design work for the extensions to Merced and Bakersfield. We structured each of those under notices to proceed, and we have advanced and are on schedule to reach a 30% design draft design period now as 2023 is ended. Draft design, what we call a configuration footprint for the extensions both into Merced and Bakersfield. Christine Inoue, who heads up our work as the strategic delivery lead and is really what I call our looking forward person here, will do the presentation on this. But when the board authorized us to move forward on the design work, again, we set it up in 3 different NTPs. We've been advancing 2 of those 3. And just following on what Brian Annis just went through, because we got that federal grant, specifically that grant covered now bringing the design work up to 100% for the extensions into Merced and Bakersfield. So what Christine is going to lay out for the board members today is our proposal to advance for the Merced extension to 100% design. And again, now that we've got the federal grant, about 80% of those dollars will be funded with federal dollars. So that's what's before you here. And with that, I'll ask Christine Inoue to come up and do the presentation. Thanks, Christine.
Well, good morning, and thank you for that, for the introduction. Good morning, Chair Richards and the Board of Directors. I am Christine Inoue, the Chief Engineer of Strategic Delivery here at the Authority. And today I'll be presenting agenda item number 3, consider providing approval to issue notice to proceed 2 for the Merced to Madera project. The Authority is recommending approval to issue NTP 2 for Merced to Madera High-Speed Rail Contract 2202. NTP 2 will result in continuing design services with Stantec Consulting and Services Incorporated to complete final design and construction-ready documents. This is a significant step for the Authority and a major milestone towards completing the Merced extension and the early operating segment connecting Merced, Fresno, and Bakersfield. Next slide. NTP 2 will advance the project into stage 4 of our staged project delivery process. This is the early works and the right-of-way stage. The NTP 2 services will include final design and construction-ready documents, construction staging plan and constructability reviews, updated travel time enhancements, updated project risks, construction schedules, and cost estimates. We'll also begin securing the environmental permits during this stage of the work. Next slide. NTP 2 begins at R Street in Merced and continues south to the north end of CP 1. This is the entire length of the Merced to Madera project. The NTP 2 contract value is $103.4 million. And this is the same amount reported to the board at the time of the RFQ and contract award in 2022. The work is planned to be completed in 2 years, with some overlap planned with NTP 1 and NTP 3. Next slide. The M2M project has made great progress since we've awarded the contract in 2022. This past October, Stantec submitted the draft configuration footprint to the authority on schedule. In December, and after review, the authority accepted the draft configuration footprint, also on schedule. Value engineering and value analysis workshops were conducted in the fall to challenge and analyze the design, looking to improve performance, value, quality, and to reduce costs. Final decisions on the value engineering and value analysis items are planned for next month, and the items will be incorporated into the final design. Cost estimation workshops were also conducted. Next slide. Alignment workshops to optimize the design and enhance the travel time were conducted last summer, and the right-of-way parcels for the M2M section have been completed or have been identified. Right-of-way acquisition activities are planned to begin this spring, along with the completion of all of our third-party agreements. And lastly, Stantec is exceeding all of our small business utilization goals. I'm happy to report that Stantec has achieved 39% small business, 13.5% disadvantaged business enterprise, and 7% DVBE. Next slide. NTP2 will be funded with the federal state partnership grant, which was awarded to the authority in December. The grant will fund approximately 80% of the total cost of the final design, which is about $82.7 million. The related board item requesting approval to augment the expenditure authorization related to this new federal grant included the scope of NTP2 and final design. Next slide. The key contract dates are shown here. We signed the contract in October of 22 and quickly issued NTP1. NTP3 was issued in May of 2023. And with a board approval, we anticipate issuing NTP2 in mid-April of this year. And then work on the final design will begin once NTP2 is issued. Next slide. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time and your consideration. Happy to take any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
would this contract enable us to do any right-of-way acquisition?
Yes, we are actually ready to begin right-of-way acquisitions activities as soon as we get the NTP2. So yes,
Will we have to be at 60% design in order to do that?
we actually can begin on some of the full acquisition parcels. And then once a project reaches 60% design, we'll have certainty for those that are anticipated to be partial acquisitions.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick
Yes.
comment.
Yes, go ahead, Ernie.
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation, by the way, and the observation is the speed at which you made the presentation allows us to digest information a little easier. Some of our presenters presented a lot more quickly, and for some of us who don't digest information as quickly, your presentation is much easier to digest. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Camacho. Any other questions or comments?
Motion approved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Director Schenk? Chair Richards?
Yes.
Director Camacho?
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller?
Yes.
Director Perea?
Yes.
Director Gomedi? Director Escutia? Director Williams?
Aye.
Director Cohen?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Noy, if you wouldn't mind letting our contractor Stan Tech know that how much we appreciate the fact that they have not only met but exceeded our small business goals. And I think that since it's ever come to the board when this policy was put in place years and years ago, I don't think we've ever had a report of a contractor meeting and exceeding those goals. So it's not lost on this board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to item number 4 today is the economic impact analysis of the high-speed rail projects investments. And Mr. Broughton, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Director Richards and chair members. Given Director Camacho's comments, I will try to make this as brief as possible. Try to beat Christine's time. So I'm here today to go over.
Is there a chance
Yeah,
you can just
for sure.
raise that as high as you can, either that or shrink yourself about 4 or 6 inches? I don't know, whatever's easy.
I'll just lean forward a little bit. So I'm here today to go over the 2023 economic impact analysis. This updates the report that we've done since 2017 through the 2023 fiscal year, 22-23 fiscal year through June. So altogether, we've analyzed every year expenditure data or investment in this project from 2006 until June 2023. Next slide. So this report that we're gonna go over today, again, highlights the expenditure up until June of 2023. And we also analyze projected costs and economic impacts for the future based on the business plan or the draft business plan data. Next slide. So we have 3 major economic indicators that we calculate. The first is job years, which is the equivalent of 1 year long full-time jobs supported by the project. So for example, 1 employee working for 5 years equals 5 job years, and 5 employees working for 1 year would also equal 5 job years. So for ease of use, I'm going to say jobs going forward onto this presentation. We also have labor income, which includes all forms of employment income, including compensation, wages, benefits, and payroll taxes that firms or like the high-speed rail pays to its employees, and or income earned by self-employed workers or unincorporated sole proprietorships. And finally, we have the big number, the economic output, which is an estimated value of all economic activity taking place as a result of our investment in this project. So $1 invested in high-speed rail sparks several additional activities in addition to labor income, including the purchases of goods and services. And it's basically, it measures the economic ripple of our investment into the state of California. Next slide. And how we get to those indicators are measured by the accumulation of 3 effects. You have your direct effects, which are the direct investment from high-speed rail to our contractors and employees. Next, we have indirect effects, which is the second level down, which includes investment from the contractors and employees into things like concrete, steel, supplies, transportation components, computer components, that type of thing. And then finally, we have indirect effects, which are further ripples where you have the employees and contractors spending on housing and groceries and further kind of gross domestic product type of ripples. Next. So as I said earlier, we've been doing this report since 2017, and we're continuing the same modeling method that uses industry standard models. We use a software called InPlan that we put our expenditure inputs, and it produces the outputs as I talked about earlier. This year, the only really solid or noticeable change is what's called the Mirio model, which is it more accurately predicts expenditures and impacts within regions of the state. So not to get too into it, but it does a much better job of showing where these impacts hit and how the interplay between regions comes into play. When we first did this analysis, we had a lot of different groups peer review our report, and we continue to tout that review since we've maintained the same model and methodology since 2017. Next slide. So what we've analyzed to date for this report is $11.2 billion of investment, again, from 2006 until June of 2023. So that's the input model or input number that we use to calculate our expenditures. We also use projections going forward based on business plan data. And we'll talk about that in a few slides. Next. So one of the great benefits of this project especially is the impacts, the positive impacts economically and socioeconomically of our investments into disadvantaged communities throughout the state. California recognizes specific geographic areas as disadvantaged communities based on a series of indices that include pollution burden, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors. In this last year alone, we spent 66% of our investment in disadvantaged communities, which is a non-insignificant number. All told throughout this project since 2006, we've had 56% of our 11.2 billion directly invested into disadvantaged communities, which again is a massive number. Next. And for some of the indicator impacts, we've supported over 92,000 jobs to date, or at least as of June 2023. So each year that number grows as we continue to invest our dollars into this project. Next.
Excuse me, is that
Yeah.
number based on man hours and not actually that number of people actually working?
Yeah, it's a output of a model, basically, where it counts hours and through dollars invested, right? So it's a output of all of our investments and including the direct, indirect, and induced effects. So it's not as simple to say it's directly hours involved, but it's a standard economic modeling number that supports that. So if that helps clarify it. So yeah, I wouldn't say directly hours involved, but it is definitely model supported. Okay. Next. So our labor income invested to date is 7 billion. Again, that's direct income to our contractors, our employees, and then the continued effects of that investment into other labor income effects from the induced, indirect, and that from the authority's investment. Next. Then the big number, the economic output, $18.4 billion of economic output that this project has supported or generated since 2006. Again, that's only for our dollars currently invested, 11.2 billion. Next. One of the benefits of this analysis is that we attribute the dollars and investments and impacts to where these expenditures are incurred throughout the state. So this slide will show the different regions that we apply the expenditures to and where these impacts are felt. Obviously, the Central Valley is the largest one. That's where most of the expenditures are incurring and where the construction is ongoing. So we have to date $7.7 billion of economic output for just for the Central Valley. You also have the Bay Area, Sacramento, LA, and then we also have a calculation for the rest of California. And again, we apply the investments to where they are occurred. So it's a good snapshot of up and down the state, all the positive economic benefits this project has generated so far. Next slide. So the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about projected impacts. Previous ones were recognized impacts through our direct investment. The next few are with our projected business plan data. So we're going to project the impacts for the whole project. Next slide. I won't go through all the numbers again to make this quicker. The Central Valley, we project to have $69.6 billion of economic output once this project is complete. Again, that's just for our direct investment in completing the project, not for operations. Next slide. Northern California projected to have 53.4 billion in economic output. Next slide. Southern California, it's 80.3 billion in economic output projected. Next slide. And then, so for this slide breaks it down by what we consider the active projects. So Merced to Bakersfield project, an economic output projected of 70.3 billion. The Valley to Valley expansion, 43.9 billion. The additional for phase one build out, 89 billion. So all told for phase one, a $203.6 billion projected economic impact with 945,000 jobs supported. Next slide. So that's it in a nutshell. Again, the Central Valley is obviously the major place where the investment has occurred, although it has occurred throughout the state. We've had $7.7 billion in economic activity alone in that region. And again, over half of our investment has impacted positively disadvantaged communities, which again is a major benefit to this project, and I think something to be applauded. I think that's it. If you got any questions.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Boughton. Any questions from members of the board? Director Schenck?
Thank you. Not really a question. Thanks for the good news.
Yeah.
And this really is something that we should be touting, and those who are benefiting should be touting it also. I'd like to just build on what Director Cohn had said. In meeting with expanded groups of legislators, we see this good news, we understand it, and those of us who have been able to see what you would call induced economic impact in other countries. When I lived in Japan or traveling in Spain, it's profound, and we can't expect that people who aren't involved as we are will understand that. So it's up to us to help educate. And I think this is exactly the kind of thing that we ought to be taking to not just the speaker, but as Director Cohn has mentioned, to expanded group of legislators, and calling on those who are impacted so positively to get out there in their communities and spread this as well up and down the state, because that's the kind of support that will help us as we look to expanded, stable sources of funding. So thank you for this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Schenck. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Director Cohen.
Thank you for this report and equally good and important news. And just to add to that, excuse me, I think in addition to the legislature, we need to meet with organizations up and down the state that represent, effectively any constituency, because everybody would be impacted by this, I would argue. Some more than others, but everybody would be impacted positively by high-speed rail. There was a beautiful piece I just wanted to highlight for those that may not have seen it done. Forgive me, I forget actually who covered it, but it was around the impact that high-speed rail is having and will have for Fresno. And what struck me about it that I thought was so important is it tells the story really well so that people can envision how high-speed rail will impact them, their communities, and the state. And we need to win the hearts and minds of people across California for this project. And to do that, they have to be able to see it. They have to be able to see it and envision it. That will help them want to pay for it. But we need to be thinking about the human-centered story of high-speed rail. When we're talking about dollars, when we're talking about the unsexy stuff, for lack of a better word, we need to be remembering the people that we have to win. And so we really do need to start meeting with coalitions up and down this state in big ways, and reminding people that high-speed rail is happening and will happen for them, and will transform their life and the life of their community. So I just want to highlight that Fresno piece for anybody that didn't have a chance to see it and read it. Do you remember?
Thank
Can I
you.
add?
Yeah, I do. I
Thank you.
just, that was in Cal Matters is where that piece appeared.
Who isn't reading Cal Matters?
Thank you, Director Cohen. Any other questions or comments? Mr. Boughton, thank you very much. This is just an information item, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to Item number 5 is the business plan update and CEO Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, when does the business plan come to us for approval?
The business plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be
April?
next month, I suspect.
Yeah, in fact,
Mr. Kelly.
I'm going to give you a little summary of that now. The business plan will be, a draft of it will be made public in the first week of February. It comes to the board, and then the board, as you will recall, Director Perea, the board has a public hearing on this at the end of February. You will take public comments for the next 60 days. And then the board will direct changes that it wants to the document. And it'll be before the board for approval at the April hearing.
Okay.
So that we can submit it to the legislature by the statutory deadline of May 1st. So they'll come back to you guys in that timeline. So I appreciate the question. I did want to just spend a minute giving a bit of a summary about the upcoming business plan. Again, it's become sort of an annual exercise for us. When I started here, the business plan was the big document where we updated where we are on cost and schedule and all those things. And then I think with the combination of COVID and candidly us getting more definitional on exactly what we're building and how we're going to move forward with it, we sort of had a merging of the project update report, which is an odd year report we put out, with the business plan in the even numbered years. And one of the things that's occurred is the project update report has now become the more comprehensive document. It's the document where we are really laying out more comprehensive updates about where we've been, where we are, what the reset is on schedule and costs. And the business plan is now almost updating what the last project update report said. That again is a combination of, I think, impacts of COVID that mess with our timelines a little bit, but also the fact that we got very definitional about what we're trying to do, starting with the 2019 project update report. And so that shifted a little bit how we do the work. That said, next slide or first slide here. The business plan is required by statute every 2 years in even numbered years. It includes limited updates to forecasts that we know at the time. And as I said, the COVID impacted the release date, although we're now back on more of a regular schedule. Our 2023 project update report provided gives a little bit more time to work through forecasts and estimates. And that report was one where we really did a major update of both cost estimates and schedule for the program in the 2023 project update report that we put. And to me, it was a keystone document that relayed or redefined the foundational work that we have before us. It updated, as I said, the cost and schedule estimates for the Merced to Bakersfield segment and specified that the Merced to Bakersfield segment would be built as a dual track electrified railroad with a shared station in Merced. And that has since become a statutory requirement for the program. So again, that definition came forward in that plan. Now, as we come forward with a business plan, it's just 10 months later since we last did the project update report. There is significant progress that we'll be reporting in the business plan. You will see that we still align with the project, with the 2023 per direction, schedule, budget, and vision, and where we plan to go. And notably, with the 3.1 billion federal funds granted in December, how that has changed our landscape a little bit for the better. And we'll talk a bit about that in this plan. There's also extensive discussion in this upcoming business plan about risk identification, management, and mitigation. It's one of the things that we have, I think, done much better at the authority. We spend a lot of time now on enterprise and program risk identification, management, and mitigation. And the program will, the business plan will talk a bit about that. Next slide, please. So again, reminding that the March, again, 10 months ago, we did a major program restatement with the 23 project update report. We set a target for the schedule of the early operating segment to be ready for service between 2030 and 2033. We updated cost estimates. We set a funding strategy that informed the legislature about how we would move forward on this and how we'd work with our federal partner to bring dollars to the program. We established in the per new ridership estimates that reflected changes to California's population, which is much more stagnant today than it's been, and also impacts of COVID on transit and rail ridership. We established all of that in the 23 per. We also updated our baseline budget and schedule including a schedule for the completion of the construction packages 1, 2, 3, and 4. And as you see there, 2026, 2026, and 2023 for the respective construction packages. And we set those targeted goals for critical procurements, such as tracking systems, train sets, and stations. And, you know, I say a lot here, I'm updating you about the business plan, but I'm talking a lot about the PER, because this 24 business plan is working off of that document directly. And a lot of what we said in that PER is what we're still reporting, how we're doing against that. And that's what the business plan is aligning. So next slide here, major accomplishments since the release of the 2023 business plan. One, of course, the big news is we've been awarded, and not just the last award, but we were awarded several grants in the last 11 months that total about $3.3 billion. We advanced procurements to move the project forward toward operations. Our first construction package covering 22.5 miles is really reaching substantial completion. Our construction jobs now exceed 12,200 in 2023. In 2018, that was at 2,500. So construction jobs have come a long way. We exceeded our goals for the percentage of right-of-way parcels acquired at 98%. And as we talked about a little bit earlier in the Finance and Audit Committee, we set a calendar year record for the number of utilities we relocated in a single year at 254. Designs for the extensions to Merced and Bakersfield are on schedule, meeting our contract milestones for what we've done now, and the board has just taken action to allow us to advance the design to Merced. So very key accomplishments since the 2023 PER came out, and the 24 business plan, we'll talk a bit about those. Is there a question?
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? Just how's Caltrain electrification going in the Bay, San Francisco to?
Yeah,
San
so
Jose?
that's a project that cost about $2.9 billion. We are contributing about $733 million for that from both Prop 1A dollars and from cap and trade dollars. Their schedule for completion is the end of 2024.
That's what I would add that bullet.
Yeah,
Because
so
that's
fall-
going to
yeah.
be,
You will see that in the business plan.
Great.
But yeah, so that's the other thing is some of those bookend investments like that one, they've already finished the major grade separation in the peninsula. Grade separation in LA is advancing, will be completed in 25. The thing that we have more work to do on bookends is the work on the LA Union Station with Metro. But all of those updates will be included in the business plan. Again, key updates just for us that we'll cover in the business plan on where we are in the valley. Advancements across all the major activities consistent with the direction of the 23 PER. You see on, the next slide, if I can jump to the next slide. This is the scorecard again on where we stand on the each construction package in the valley in terms of where we are on slide 5 with, design completed, where right-of-way stands, utility relocation, structures, all of that, overall contract value, spent versus contract value. So all of these things will be updated in the 24 business plan. Next slide, please. Other things we will cover, again, I think importantly, the costs and schedule are generally remaining consistent with the 2023 project update report. The cost estimates are really unchanged from the PER, released just, as I said, 11 months ago. While the cost estimates are unchanged, the business plan will talk about the cost risks for each of the construction packages, and the area where we have the highest cost risk is tied to CP23. It's both the largest construction package and the one that was both impacted most by the 2022-2023 flooding. We have a major change order with that contractor that's in arbitration. An arbitration decision will be made later this spring on that one. There are third-party issues that we're still resolving on 2-3. And the final revised baseline schedule, even though we know we're going to hit the 2026 schedule, getting it down to the specific date and month is still in negotiation. So those things have to conclude on 2-3. That's the biggest risk area on our cost issues. The phase 1 cost updates are pending completion of environmental documents for 2 Southern California sections, Palmdale to Burbank and LA to Anaheim. And as has been our policy, we typically update in total the full cost estimate for phase 1 once that environmental work is completed. Next slide. We will update further on ridership numbers in the business plan 2 here, and you will recall that one of the big things that you saw in the PER was a reduction in ridership on this charts before you here. The yellow box is what we reported in the 2023 PER in terms of ridership. In terms of the Central Valley, the Merced to Bakersfield, Merced to Bakersfield segment, that segment, we've done some system optimization given the ridership numbers that were in the PER. So we're seeing a ridership number now at about 7.8 million a year. That's compared to if you don't build the electrified system, the regional transit and rail ridership in that region in 2030 would be about 2.8 million riders. So we still think there's a huge public benefit on moving forward with the Central Valley system. On Valley to Valley, things are really relatively consistent, slightly up the ridership between what we reported in the PER and what we will be saying in the business plan. And when you look a little bit further out into phase one, it's down a little bit, but we're still hovering around 30 million riders a year once we are in full phase one development. And a couple of things that are important about this. For both the Valley to Valley stretch and the phase one stretch, when you're going from Silicon Valley into the Central Valley and for all of phase one, these are still revenue generating projections given these ridership values. And just to put a little context to these values, in Valley to Valley, about 12 million riders a year, just to give that some comparison. In the Northeast Corridor, which is the busiest passenger rail corridor in America, the intercity system run by Amtrak carries about 12.5 passengers a year. So Valley to Valley would be consistent with that number. And then once you're in phase one, LA to San Francisco, you're carrying about 2.5 times the numbers of riders that are now in the Northeast Corridor. So we'll talk about this a bit in the business plan. Next
Brian?
slide. Yeah.
Brian, if just briefly, when, as we're building the system out, when we complete the Valley to Valley, when they hit Merced, how do the folks connect into the Bay Area? What's the system, the process?
You mean when we're first at the 171?
Yeah,
Yeah. The key connection point will be the Merced station, where there will
Right.
be two systems that will join the high-speed train in Merced. One of them is the San Joaquin's conventional rail system that will take passengers either north to Sacramento or northwest to Oakland. The other one that's coming, not to Merced yet, but will be there at around the same time, is the ACE commuter service that goes from San Jose into the Central Valley now, but it'll go further into Merced. And the idea is that we'll meet at that redesigned, rebuilt Merced station.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be a simple cross-platform transfer to go from there to those other destinations north. Okay. The other thing I gotta say, and this is important, the development of our system down there and that connection with those connecting services provide about 18 rail trips per day. And just to give that some context, today the Amtrak service, the daily service is about 8 trips per day. So what you're getting is a lot more ridership opportunities, a lot more service because we're coming there and working with those connecting services.
Yes, remember Cohen was saying, I mean, other than we really have to step up our game in educating the legislators, the other side of the coin is the public. And there's a lot of people, who ask, okay, great, Merced to Bakersfield, but then what?
Yeah.
And we do have we have a plan.
Yeah, it's part,
But
certainly
people don't
part of
know
a
about
larger
it. We
system.
need to get
Yes.
more
Yes.
active and letting people know about it.
Next slide. Sorry, next slide here. There we go. Of course, the big news between the PER and the business plan was the grant award of the federal funds. And just to be specific, I know we talk about this, but there were specific things that the grant funded, and we will be very specific about that in the business plan. It did fund the purchase of 6 electric high-speed trains, both 2 for testing and commissioning, and then 4 additional ones for full operations. It did fund the design and construction of train set facilities. It did fund the design and construction of the Fresno station. It did fund the final design and right-of-way acquisition for the Merced and Bakersfield extensions, part of which you just authorized us to advance on. And it did fund the civil works, traction power, track, overhead catenary system, and systems for the Bakersfield interim extension deeper into Bakersfield. So this grant was very meaningful for us in terms of moving forward. And I think Brian Annis mentioned this earlier. It's about 3.1 billion in total for the grant. We matched that with about 900 million or so of state funds. And so you're getting a value of built in excess of 4 billion for the 3 billion or so in federal funds. Next slide.
Yeah, Brian,
Yeah,
going back to your slide, there was talk in the past, I think Bruce Armistead made, in one of his presentations, and you had alluded to this, that we might be piggybacking our, train set procurement with that of Brightline. Are we still doing that or not?
yeah, I'm gonna say that that's still a possibility. Brightline is making a decision on what manufacturer they're gonna go forward with. I think it is public that the two manufacturers that are qualified to provide our trains are two that Brightline's in negotiations with. So there may still be an opportunity, and we're in discussions with Brightline. I spoke with them last week about a potential for how we might be able to do some things together. It's not settled yet, but it's still something we're evaluating.
So that would depend upon us buying from the same manufacturer, obviously.
Yeah, it would.
Okay,
And again, we're in a procurement right now, and so
yeah, right.
I don't want to get too far out on that. I just say it is something that's been discussed, and again, want to see what kind of efficiencies that possibility might bring. So. we'll
Thank you.
evaluate that. Okay, next slide. I just want to show this because I think it's a bit of a graphic depiction of how important that federal grant was. On the left, the box that's got most of that kind of reddish brownish boxes. Looking at the left side of this, it's not really too complicated. It's been in our past business plan. We've talked about it here before. But on the left side is the stretch of the Merced to Bakersfield project. And across the top are the different phases of the program. And we put our funding strategy together in 2022 and 2023 to go to the federal government and seek funding. We identified through the blue and the brown unfunded segments that we were hoping to fund with ultimately what would be that $8 billion 5-year funding that we're asked for, with phased development as we go forward on the project. The dark green on that chart is funded and completed, and the light green is funded. And so just with the federal grant that came in, you see the change in the chart, right? You go from the left to the right, and the number of items that are now funded with just this grant enables us to move forward on very important project phases because this funding is available to us now. Again, getting the design complete, starting to buy the right of way for the extensions, buying train sets, all of this now is something that we have in place. And for those things that are not yet green, getting back to our earlier conversation, those are the areas that we'll focus on seeking additional federal and state funding to get this work done. But again, you can see how important that grant was. Next slide. In terms of what's next and key updates that we'll also cover in the business plan, finishing CPs 1 through 4, design work on the Merced and Bakersfield extensions. We'll continue the environmental review and remaining project sections, Palmdale to Burbank, LA to Anaheim. Advance work on the collaborative projects in both Northern and Southern California, including project updates on things like the Caltrain electrification project, the grade separation projects, and other projects of joint interest, including stations like Diridon or the portal in the Bay Area, are important things that we are continuing to work on, and we'll update that a bit. We'll talk a little bit about the executed procurements that we have and the things we'll be advancing to get the entirety of the Central Valley work done. And again, advancing station designs and continue to advocate for future funding. Next slide. Again, just a schedule of things, reminder that when we first put out the draft plan in February, it's sort of, management sense of where the project is and where we are. There starts a 60-day public comment period, including hearing that you will all host for the public in February. We'll take public comment on this. The board will take in that comment over time, direct the staff on changes you want to the project update, the business plan. We'll make those changes, come back to the board in April to execute those things and to seek approval of the business plan. And that final business plan is due to the legislature on May 1st. And so that is a summary of what's coming before you as we get into February, March, and April. I'm happy to answer any questions or move on.
Any questions for our CEO?
I have a
Yes,
couple.
go ahead, Director Correa.
Brian, if I could suggest that maybe it will be a chart in the plan, but legislators, they have a lot on their plate and most times they get big, thick reports. They don't have the time to read them. So are you gonna have like a summary page, executive summary that will even show a chart to show just the basic timeline? We're gonna have
Yeah,
substantial completion by this point in
Yeah.
2026. We're gonna
Yeah.
have trains bought by this. We're gonna
Yeah.
have the track and rail systems completed by here,
So,
testing.
yeah,
In other
so-
words, they're just a real simple.
Yeah, so at the front, the plan is in production, but you'll see there'll be an executive summary at the front. It'll have charts and graphs and things like that that show the key timeline dates to make sure that we're in operations in our window that we
Yeah.
identified in the project update report. And so those things will all be in the plan, and we're trying to condense as much of that into the executive summary part to make it as simple to read as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, you can find it all in here, but you have to look
Yes.
for it.
Yeah.
But if you could just have like okay, when is the train gonna be bought?
Yeah.
When's the
Yeah.
track gonna be built?
Yeah.
When it can be testing, that way they can just see it. I think
Yeah.
would be great.
We'll certainly have the timeline, but as we discuss, some of that's going to be funding dependent that we
Yeah.
have to make sure we
Mhm.
get.
Now, the track and systems RFP, RFQ, that was supposed to be out already. Is it out?
The track and systems design is out.
Design.
We're in design. I'm sorry. You guys approved the RFQ for the track and system design.
Right.
We're out now. And when is Bruce here? Remind me when we're coming back for that? January 22nd, but are we coming back to the board for approval? Yeah, we'll come back to them. Okay. In spring? Okay, we'll be back in spring for the approval of that actual contract. So you guys approved us going out on the RFQ.
Mhm.
I think we got to come back and get you to approve the final award of that.
Okay. What other pieces are going out on tracking systems, if any?
Yeah, well, we'll be coming forward in 2024 for a couple of really key procurements. I mean, one of them is obviously we want to move to the RFP on the train system. On the track and system, we'll be talking about later in the year, coming back for the first construction element of the track and systems, which will probably include elements of CP4, getting ready for that construction element. So, design is first, but we'll be coming back for some of the construction
Right.
elements on this as well.
Okay.
Chair Richard, if I could
Yes, please.
make a comment on this very topic. I think just a reminder, when these active procurements are out, staff, executives, the board, it's very important we not communicate with any of the folks that are potential bidders, just to ensure we don't have any unfair, problems that arise and cause protests. So
And you let us know when those
we
windows hit,
absolutely
right?
do.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And may I just add a note to the bidders that they shouldn't try to communicate with us.
Right, because we're in that process right now with that. May I, Brian, so what I'm taking from this is what our numbers in the project update report, the latest one, are consistent and we're not having any change in numbers in terms of our budget,
Yeah,
our
so-
contingency,
Yeah,
or
so.
let us know if there are.
Yeah, so, well, we're gonna report that we're in line with the PER, which we are. We're also gonna report where the risks are, and the one thing that does change, and I had some conversation with Director Cohen about this during the briefing yesterday, is when we finish our environmental documents for each segment, we then update the cost for those segments. And in the 2023 PER, in the document we put out in March, we noted that, for example, on Palmdale to Burbank, when we finish that environmental document, we'll be at the upper range of that segment's cost. So we won't be done with that work by the time this plan is out, but we will shortly thereafter. And so we're saying again in this plan, the estimate is here on where we're going to be on that. That final cost estimation will be put in once the environmental work is done. And we do that because during the environmental process, the dollars change. I'll give you 3 examples. When we did Palmdale to Burbank, we had a $500 million change to get around the Chavez Monument. When in Palmdale to Burbank to meet the Army Corps' request to avoid Una Lake, it's another $500 or $600 million impact. We do environmental justice and mitigation measures that have cost to them. And more recently, we just talked to this board about a supplemental alternatives analysis for LA to Anaheim. And in doing that, we actually reduced the cost of that segment versus where we were earlier by several $billions. So we want to get the work done before we update the cost, just like we did in the PER. We're going to indicate what those are here. And I just say this, in the PER, we estimated what phase one costs will be in a range. It's got a low, a base, and a high. And when we complete all this environmental work, we will still be within that range. That's what I can tell you.
Okay,
that-
so that's a no significant changes to
Yeah, no
those
significant
numbers,
changes
correct?
in this.
Okay, and same thing with contingency.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Miller. Any other questions or comments for our CEO? Hearing none, this, ladies and gentlemen, was an information item, as is the next, and that's our CEO report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the CEO report, I just want to update a couple of key things again, mostly between our last time we were together and now, and some things that are coming up in front of us. So jumping to the first slide, we just talked a little bit about this, but reminder that our statement of qualification packages were received in November for the train set procurements. We qualified both sets of teams that submitted SOQs. That's Alstom Transportation, Inc. and Siemens Mobility, Inc. This step allows us to move forward to release the RFP and the eventual procurement of state-of-the-art high-speed train sets capable of speeds in operation of 220 miles per hour. The train set and related services contract will be funded in part by the federal state grant that we just got. And the RFP is expected to come to the board for consideration. There's a change here in April, not February. We'll be back to the board for the RFP in April on this train set. Okay. So that's update one. Next slide.
Brian,
Yes.
one real quick question on the two manufacturers. Obviously, neither one of them are U.S. manufacturers, and I don't know that we have any U.S. manufacturers that build trains. But how are we getting around to Buy America?
Well, one, Buy America is not for us to get around. We're going to be in full compliance with the Buy America provisions. And so the manufacturer's part of this process is for them to tell us how they'll be in compliance with Buy America. And so that'll be part of our RFP review and process. Just for way of information for folks, Alstom does produce some trains in upstate New York, and Siemens, among other places, produces conventional trains anyway, and light rail and other things here in Sacramento. And so, and other locations, I'm sure that I'm not at the top of my
But
mind.
wasn't that considered in the pre-qualifications?
I'm not sure what you mean by considered.
Well, when we evaluated, we needed an evaluation as to whether or not they comply with with the requirements. Was that not part of an SOQ and part of an evaluation that we would look at?
Yeah, yes, in terms of meeting the requirements of the Buy America Act, we've been very clear that the act has to be met in this process, both for the SOQ process and will continue through the RFP process.
So we have evaluated that. Thank you.
Okay, next slide. I am required, of course, to report to the board any contract adjustments or change orders that exceed 25 million. And so I've got a couple I'm going to run through here. Now, the first is a contract amendment we did with our early train operator. We extended the contract to extend through really further into the operating part of getting into Merced to Bakersfield. And so we extended the contract through November of 2026. There was a $47.6 million cost. It's important to note that the early train operator is both our key advisor on how we get into operations, the kind of agreements we have to get into, how we structure services between fare operators. They also help us with ridership estimations and things like that. And so the ETO is an important element or important part of how we advance our work. They're also providing us some international background and flavor about how we approach costs and methodology as we look forward on cost estimating for the system. And so we're going to rely on them to continue to help with us as we go forward. So we extended this contract into the end of, near the end of 2026. Next slide. Our contractors under the contract can pass through costs for both bonds that they are required to carry and the cost of carrying those bonds, as well as insurance cost recovery. Insurance policies that they have to carry for the project is common in all contracts, but as we've extended the contracts pursuant to the project update report, they carry through these costs. And so the cost for both the change order for bond costs and for insurance costs have been carried through, and that is a pass-through cost of the authority. So we just executed those in the last several weeks. And so 26.7 on bond costs and 33.9 on insurance costs. Next slide. We talk a lot about third parties as we work through construction and design elements. We got to make sure that we are meeting requirements of our third-party partners. And so we have a couple of change orders in 2-3 that we executed in the last 6 months, really tied to third-party requirements. Working closely with Caltrans on some bridge requirements, the authority revised the design of the north approach section of the Tule River Viaduct, combined 2 aerial structures connected by the HSR embankment into a single bridge consistent with Caltrans requirements. And the approval of that change order allows the authority to compensate the contractor for those construction costs to meet that third-party requirement, which we did under change order 369.1, 33.7 million. And then similarly, another third party, BNSF. Many of our structures are right next to or along the BNSF alignment, and BNSF had requirements for separation requirements between where their assets are and where ours are. We've had to implement those into some design changes before we get into construction on a couple of facilities, the Tule River Viaduct issue. So one is requiring a 5-foot separation maintenance offset between the unprotected high-speed rail structure support and the BNSF right-of-way. That was 39.5. And then the next slide, also for BNSF requirements, is there's a vertical clearance that goes along with that too. They require a minimum vertical clearance of 24 feet from the pergola over the existing BNSF track. And to accommodate that, we paid the contractor to meet that third-party requirement, 35 million. Next slide. AECOM, I do now getting to some more fun news, if you will. I am happy to introduce you all to the new principal in charge for AECOM, who will be our guide as we go forward on navigating the future challenges and opportunities and with the projects. And so I want to ask my friend Daniel Horgan to stand up, who is now an employee of AECOM. And he's a familiar face to all of you. He prior was with WSP, but he's been an invaluable resource for us to move through this project. And we're thrilled that he's made the transfer to AECOM and continue to be working closely with us on this project. Thank you, Daniel. Congratulations. Next. I mentioned to you all that our very own Melissa Figueroa was awarded from Women in Transportation Seminar, the Sacramento Woman of the Year. There is a ceremony coming up for that. I wanted to make sure the board was aware of that. She'll be recognized at a dinner and ceremony on Wednesday, January 31st on 2024. The event starts at 5:30 on that day. Dinner and ceremonies at 6:30. You can buy tickets online. And if you work through Alice Rodriguez on our staff, we can make sure that any board member that wants to attend that can. But again, that is Wednesday, January 31st at the Sheraton here in Sacramento. Okay. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any questions for our CEO or comments?
I have just one, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Director Perea.
Ryan, it's my monthly Mr. Kim question, but certainly you can answer it. Just,
Where's Dennis?
yeah.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we're hitting or scheduling for substantial completion 2026 for CP1.
Yeah.
And critical to that is that resolution of those third-party issues that are critical to that path.
Yeah.
Are we on schedule with those?
Yeah, I mean, all of the right-of-way and utility relocation work that's in front of us, we are scheduling and working to meet the ultimate construction schedule. And so we're now in partnering meetings. I've got a partnering meeting on Monday with the CP1 team.
Yeah.
And yeah, we are on schedule. 83% across all the CPs of the utilities are now either moved or are in progress of being moved today.
Mhm.
And so our schedule going forward is for us to continue to move those to meet the construction
Yeah.
completion deadline.
Yeah, we're focused on it. We've been talking, I know there's a ton of them that
Yeah.
we still need to do, but there's only a few of them that we need to hit our 2026 and
That's right. For the
we're, and we're good there.
Dennis, there's anything I missed there? Oh, see, I covered it. You can tell him I covered it.
He did a great job.
Was I eloquent?
Yes, very eloquent.
Thank you.
But just to add, though, we had 4 utility relocations that were slated in January for Belmont. And we achieved those at least a week or several weeks earlier.
Perfect. Yeah.
So we're, under Brian Kelly's leadership, we're doing a great job.
Oh, man. Give him a raise. Give him a raise, Brian.
I'll pay him later.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Dennis.
Wow.
Um,
I think we're done.
yeah, I think we're definitely done. Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian. Earlier today, there was a Finance and Audit Committee meeting which Vice Chair Miller handled, and she'll now give you a short report on today's Finance and Audit meeting.
This will be very short because a lot of this information was already provided to the board, but the capital outlay in November was 186 million. And in December, we are looking at an estimate of 138 million. So our construction is going smooth and accelerated. Our contingency is still 1.3 billion remaining, which is on target. And we covered this utility relocation, we covered in right of way. We're at 98% parcels delivered, which is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Vice Chair Miller? Thank you. The final item on today's agenda is offering the members, if any member has any comments that he or she would like to make before the close of today's meeting. Director Cohen.
I just wanted to highlight something that the CEO said. I just want to congratulate Melissa on that award. It's well deserved. You do important work for high-speed rail every day. And the industry, the broader build industry needs more women. So you're just a wonderful example to people and just very, very well deserved.
Thank you, Director Cohen. Yeah, anybody else this morning?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just
Director
wondered,
Schenk? Director Schenk, okay.
yeah, I just wanna
Definitely.
mention briefly that,
Second, yeah. Oh, you're agree, okay.
yeah, the city of planning a trip to Japan, Tokyo, Japan in late March. Be meeting with some of their government officials and some of the train folks. But their main purpose is to go and start looking at housing, how housing and economic development works around the train stations.
Mhm.
So our plan is to go in late March for that. So I'll let you know.
Great. Thank you, Director Perea. Anybody else this morning? Seeing nobody who has any other comments, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us today here, and those of you across the state. We appreciate your attendance, and we will see you next month. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.